The moment risk stopped feeling dangerous. Nothing collapsed. Nothing exploded. That was the problem. To understand the moment risk stopped feeling dangerous, we need to look at how perception changed over time. Risk does not disappear when systems stabilize. It fades when consequences feel distant. When shocks are absorbed repeatedly, danger loses its edge. Today's banking system has experienced crisis after crisis without total failure. Each time, damage was contained. Recovery followed. This pattern rewired expectations. Risk began to feel manageable, familiar, even routine. Early on, fear enforced discipline. Losses were visible. Failures were final. Risk carried weight because consequences arrived quickly. Over time, that feedback weakened. Protection intervened. Losses were softened. Recovery became predictable. This did not make decision-makers careless. It made them confident that worst-case scenarios would be interrupted, that stability would hold, that systems would bend, not break. The shift was subtle. Risk models expanded. Leverage crept upward. Complexity increased. None of it felt reckless in isolation. Each step was justified by experience. The system had survived worse. What changed was not behavior alone. It was emotion. Risk stopped triggering fear. It triggered calculation. And calculation, without fear, leads to different choices. That emotional shift would reshape banking more deeply than any single regulation ever could. As risk lost its emotional charge, decision-making grew increasingly abstract. Models replaced memory. Scenarios replaced stories. The system stopped asking how risk felt and focused on how it performed. Institutions built confidence from survival. Each avoided collapse became evidence that safeguards worked. Capital buffers were tested. Liquidity lines were activated. Stress scenarios passed. The absence of disaster reinforced belief in control. This belief altered how boundaries were perceived. Limits felt negotiable. Assumptions felt reliable. Risk was no longer something to fear, but something to optimize. Exposure could be fine-tuned. Losses could be managed. The unknown felt smaller. Markets mirrored this confidence. Volatility declined. Prices stabilized. Risk premiums compressed. Investors rewarded predictability. The calmer the system appeared, the more risk it could quietly carry without triggering alarm. Technology amplified this effect. Faster data created the illusion of foresight. Real-time metrics suggested mastery. But metrics describe the present. They do not predict shifts in belief. When sentiment changes, data lags behind. This created a fragile equilibrium. Risk felt safe because it had not recently hurt. Memory faded. Experience narrowed. The system began trusting its own stability as evidence that danger had diminished. What disappeared was not risk itself. It was discomfort. And without discomfort, warning signs became easier to ignore. The conflict emerged when discomfort collided with reality. Risk does not disappear because it feels familiar. It accumulates quietly, waiting for conditions to change. When they do, familiarity offers no protection. As confidence grew, the system carried more complexity than ever. Interconnections multiplied. Dependencies deepened. Small disruptions had wider reach. Yet the emotional response remained muted. The system trusted itself. Warnings appeared, but they lacked urgency. Metrics fluctuated within acceptable ranges. Models showed resilience. Stress tests passed. Without fear, caution felt unnecessary. Signals were interpreted as noise, not threat. This emotional blind spot is dangerous. Fear once forced humility. It encouraged margins of safety. Without it, assumptions hardened. Resilience was assumed rather than tested by reality. When stress finally surfaced, reactions were swift. Tools activated. Support flowed. Panic was contained. The system survived again. But survival reinforced the same lesson. Risk could be managed. Danger could be deferred. This cycle intensified the conflict. Each rescue reduced the memory of pain. Each success weakened the deterrent effect of failure. The system grew stronger structurally, but weaker psychologically. The buildup reached its peak when risk became invisible, not because it was gone, but because it no longer felt dangerous. And when danger feels distant, Preparation gives way to confidence. The climax arrives with a realization that arrives too late. Risk never stopped being dangerous. It stopped feeling dangerous. And that distinction changes everything. When danger feels distant, preparation becomes optional. Margins shrink. Complexity grows. The system appears calm, but only because pressure is being stored, not released. Stability masks vulnerability. The resolution is uneasy. Modern banking now operates in a state of managed confidence. Risk is accepted, modeled, and distributed. Fear is suppressed through intervention and expectation. The system survives, but it does so by postponing reckoning rather than eliminating it. Today, risk remains everywhere. It moves through networks few fully understand. It concentrates quietly where attention is weakest, and it waits for a moment when confidence outruns control. The lesson is not that stability is an illusion. It is that emotional signals matter as much as technical ones. When risk stops feeling dangerous, the system loses one of its oldest safeguards. What comes next depends on whether discomfort is allowed to return, whether fear is treated as information, not failure, because without it, risk does not disappear. It only hides. There's a concept in engineering called normalization of deviance. It describes the process by which organizations gradually accept behaviors or conditions that would once have been considered unacceptable, because those behaviors or conditions have not yet produced visible failure. Each time a threshold is crossed without consequence, the threshold shifts. Each time a warning is dismissed without incident, the category of warning expands. Each time a risky practice survives, it becomes slightly less risky in the minds of those who practice it. This process is not carelessness. It is a natural adaptation of intelligent people to evidence. The evidence says, this has worked before. The conclusion follows, it will likely work again. The error lies not in the logic, but in the assumption that the conditions that made it work before are the same conditions that exist now. They rarely are. Risk accumulates in the gap between past experience and present reality, between what the data showed and what the situation has become, between the confidence that past survival has earned and the vulnerability that present complexity has quietly created. The moment risk stops feeling dangerous is not a single moment. It is a gradual process of normalizing deviance across an entire system, until the accumulated distance between what feels risky and what actually is risky becomes wide enough that a small disruption produces consequences that feel catastrophically out of proportion, because they were not out of proportion to the actual risk, only to the risk that the system had learned to feel. So what do you think? Are we repeating the same mistake again? The answer, historically, is yes. Not because people do not learn, but because the learning attaches to specific contexts, specific institutions, specific people who were present when fear was real. And then those people retire. Those institutions evolve. Those contexts change. And the next generation inherits the rules without the memories. The rules say what to do. The memories explain why. Without the memories, the rules become compliance, boxes to check, thresholds to meet, not the felt understanding of what happens when they are not met. That felt understanding is what makes risk feel dangerous. And felt understanding cannot be transferred through documentation. It must be earned through exposure, to stress, to uncertainty, to the particular quality of discomfort. That arrives when something you trusted stops behaving the way it always did. Modern systems are designed to prevent that exposure, which means each generation must relearn the same lesson, without the benefit of having felt it before. That is not a flaw in human nature. It is simply what happens when systems succeed at their stated goal, which is increasingly to make risk feel manageable, long past the point where it actually is. The